This is the Sleeping Giant Podcast, Episode 1.
Welcome to the Sleeping Giant Podcast,
where it's all about freeing your mind,
so you can take ownership of your life and prosper in your newfound freedom.
The sleeper must awaken.
and now,
Your host, Angus John Pratt.
Greetings, programs. Welcome to the inaugural episode of the Sleeping Giant Podcast, the show that is all about personal liberty, financial freedom, and self-reliance. I am Angus John Pratt, and I am so excited to be coming to you today as we finally launch on iTunes. It's been a long time coming, folks. I am so glad to be here, and I'm looking forward to developing this community with you. Today, I'm going to lay a little bit of basic philosophy on you. I know, doesn't sound exciting, but stick around. You know, I have a tendency to reference movies a lot. You remember The Empire Strikes Back, right? Well, when Luke was on the planet Dagobah, and he's in his Jedi training there, getting schooled by Master Yoda, Yoda has a plan to send him to this mysterious cave. And the upshot is, just before Luke sets off to the cave, he tells Yoda, "I'm not afraid." And Yoda looks at him kind of sidelong with a kind of a disturbing grin on his face. And of course he says, "You will be. You will be." Well, today we're going to talk about coming out of a cave. But before we dive in, I want to comment on something that happened recently. Not too long ago, a U.S. F-18 Super Hornet shot down a Syrian fighter bomber before it could attack a group of so-called moderate rebels. Since then, the U.S. has also shot down an Iranian-made drone that was supposedly armed and in use by Hezbollah. Russia has now declared that it will shoot down any aircraft in Syrian airspace unfriendly to the Assad regime. Geopolitical tensions are continuing to mount, folks, even as domestic political intrigue threatens to boil over with the whole FBI-Russia investigation thing and the continuous barrage of violence directed at President Trump, etc., etc. I'd just like to remind you that you don't have any influence whatsoever over these events. I understand the desire to keep informed and follow the news, but I caution you against getting so wrapped up in it that you neglect the things in life that you do have control over. You have control of yourself and what you do. Focus on that, rather than the endless stream of inanity in social media and the mainstream media. Do something to improve yourself and or your situation. One great thing you can do to improve yourself right now would be to subscribe to this very podcast. Having said all that, I have a question for you. What is reality? What is knowledge? These concepts are frequently expressed through allegory. Allegory is just a story that can be interpreted to reveal a hidden meaning. It comes by other names sometimes: parable, metaphor, analogy. The philosopher Plato wrote about 2,400 years ago in Book 7 of the Republic about the allegory of the cave. He compared these concepts of reality, knowledge, meaning to a person being chained up in a cave from his earliest memories. Now, I want you to try to empathize with this situation. Imagine yourself in that cave. You're unable to see or hear anything but shadows on the wall and echoes bouncing off the rock. You have no knowledge of the outside world at all. In fact, I shouldn't even say that. You don't even know that there is an outside world. This cave is all you've ever known. You've got a couple of roommates with you there, one on each side. Same situation. Don't really talk a lot. Maybe not at all. Somewhere behind you, there's a source of light that casts these shadows on the wall. Eventually, maybe you give the little that you do see and hear names, because to you, they're real. They're as real as anything. They pretty much make up your entire sense of reality. One day, you're freed and taken outside the cave. Imagine that, coming outside from this deep, dark hole in the ground. You're forced to shield your face with your hands because it's a bright, sunny day, and the light is painful to your eyes. The new scene around you is completely disorienting. You're hearing sounds you've never heard before, and without echoes. They're not these faint reflections of sound that you've heard all your life. They're the source of the sound. You can't believe that what you're seeing is real. Maybe you're wondering if you're in a dream, or that you've been spirited away by some unknown force. And then someone tells you that the shadows that you've been accustomed to are merely distorted reflections of reality, the reality that you are now seeing. And you can see that what you used to think of as reality, the shadows, are now being cast by the objects around you. The trees, the grass, even yourself. Of course, over time, you adjust to this new reality as understanding settles in through experience and interaction. You finally come to accept that light is ultimately the source of everything you've seen outside the cave. When light hits an object, it reveals it. And then the object casts its shadow, which is distorted depending on where the light is. It may be shorter or longer, slimmer or wider. It may be wavy if it's cast across an uneven surface. One day you return to the cave to share your exciting new discovery with your previous inmates, roommates. You used to think of them as your fellows, but now you realize that they're more like prisoners. You have difficulty discerning what the shadows are now, or even seeing them at all in the darkness. Still, you're excited to tell the others what you've experienced outside. But guess what happens? They don't believe you. And they think that your leaving has dulled your wits and blinded you from the truth. After a while of trying to convince them, you attempt to free them because you're so desperate for them to see for themselves what you have come to know. But they violently resist you. They don't want to leave the comfort of their reality. They're afraid of these wild things that you're saying. Perhaps they think of them as conspiracy theories. You're some kind of tinfoiled hat nut job to them. This story is really an analogy of what ancient philosophers experienced when attempting to enlighten their public with their thoughts. We've all heard the expression, ignorance is bliss. People are comfortable in their ignorance and hostile towards those that point it out. Another way of saying this is to bring it to light or illuminate it. I remember seeing cockroaches scatter when you turn the light on as a young college student in my first dorm. They run screaming if they could from the light. Socrates was actually executed for attempting to illuminate his fellows. Personally, I love the allegory of the cave, but there's a point at which Plato's philosophy and mine begin to diverge. See, Plato believed that the masses, the sheeple, as we sometimes call them today, are too ignorant to rule themselves. He actually thought that civilization had to be ruled by a class of superior philosopher kings. Not just the kings that have gone before, but enlightened, thinking philosophers. And this is where everything gets all kind of mind-bendy and bizarre. Because Plato had this idea that there was reality, and to him, reality was the cave. And a higher level of being where he had this concept of forms, perfect, heavenly, divine forms that the masses, the people living in reality on this planet, on this world, can't know. Only enlightened philosophers such as himself could really be in contact with these elevated forms. So can we ever really know that the world outside the cave is any more real than the shadows on the wall inside the cave or the faint echoes reverberating off the stone? And this is where you can fall into the trap of relativism and cynicism and maybe even nihilism. But that's not the road for us. We are firmly planted in the here and now. We reside in a world of empirical observation and the scientific method, of logic and critical thinking. We don't want to get into all this craziness of thinking, oh, maybe there is no reality. Maybe we're just electrons floating in the ether. Maybe we're living inside a computer program and we're all just the imaginations of another being. I mean, let's take reality for what it is, for what we experience. Because we do have a finite lifetime that we know and understand to be ours. And we own it our entire lives. So if it is some imaginary construct, what does it really matter? We live in the here and now. We own ourselves. And we know how this world functions. And that's really all that should matter to us at this time. Maybe if they're lucky one day, the sleepers of this world, the sheeple, will catch a glimmer of light that punches through the curtain of assumptions they hold as truth. Maybe this podcast will be that dawning. Perhaps this is decision time for you. Will you take the opportunity to break free at all costs? Or stay wrapped in your comfortable cocoon of illusions? It comes down to truth or habit, light or shadow. It is a tough choice, but it's one we all make in time. Folks, the first step on the road to personal liberty is to open your eyes to the truth. That means challenging your beliefs and questioning those who purport themselves to be an authority over you. The media, government, educational institutions, your employer, even your parents. Once again, you can see the lesson of the cave in the movie The Matrix. The pod that Neo was born in and subsisted in a vegetative state is the cave. The computer program that he took to be reality is the shadows and echoes. Reality is the bleak dystopian world that he woke up into after taking that red pill. We see how violently he reacts when the truth is revealed. And later we see another character, Cypher. We see his desire to be reinserted into the Matrix because he just can't handle the struggle anymore. It's despair, folks. The analogy can be found all throughout the history of literature. Life can be a tremendous struggle if you embrace the truth, but it also offers the greatest rewards. If you shrink from the light and cower in the perceived comfort of ignorance, you're condemning yourself to a life of slavery and imprisonment. And it's not a crime to be ignorant, but it is a crime to stay ignorant. I want the very best for you that life has to offer, so I hope you'll choose the way of the truth. I'll leave you to ponder over that for now. Tune in again next week for another knowledge bomb that will knock you back and make you think. The show notes for this episode can be found at sleepinggiantpodcast.com. From there, you can find all the ways you can connect with us. I love to hear your feedback, criticisms, and suggestions. So please engage on your platform of preference. Thanks so much for listening. I appreciate you all greatly. Until our next communion, see the cage, break the chains, free another.
The sleeper has awakened.